So you probably are well versed in this. You know there are a lot of people out there that have been arguing for a long time that school kills creativity. That when we sit kids down and we teach them a bunch of stuff, that's killing their ability to think uniquely and combine ideas. Now, is that true? Hello everybody and welcome to this week's From Theory to Practice, where I take a look at the research so you don't have to. Now the article I've selected this week is called The Effect of Semantic Memory Degeneration on Creative Thinking by Pollan and colleagues. This is an example of a pure neuroscience paper that shoots right at the heart of an educational issue. And in this case, that issue is the creativity debate. So you probably are well versed in this. You know there are a lot of people out there that have been arguing for a long time that school kills creativity. That when we sit kids down and we teach them a bunch of stuff, that's killing their ability to think uniquely and combine ideas. Now, is that true? That's what this paper unknowingly taps into. So to understand this paper, there are two things we've got to wrap our heads around. The first we learned a couple weeks back, and it's this difference between episodic and semantic memories. So just as a quick refresher, anytime you make a memory for something new, that information becomes tied to the time and place where you learned it. It's contextualized. Now, the more episodic memories you make, eventually you can pull out any similarities and create a context-less, standalone, semantic fact. And as we learned earlier, these semantic facts, those are our usable knowledge. Those are the facts we can move around in different contexts, kind of play with. Semantic facts are what allow us to go deeper into our learning. So that's kind of idea number one. Idea number two is then kind of this idea of creativity. What's going on in the brain when someone is being creative? So for instance, there's a task called the alternate use task. So essentially you get an object and someone has to come up with as many different ways as you can use that object. So for instance, if I say brick, you come up with, I could use it to build a wall, I could use it as a doorstop, I could use it as a hat, a bird could perch on it, and that's kind of a measure of creativity. How divergent can your thinking become? When somebody does this task in a scanner, we see two primary areas fire up. The first is in the frontal lobe. It's called the left middle frontal gyrus. Now this is the part of the brain that allows us to kind of organize our thinking. It allows us to inhibit some responses, combine ideas in our working memory. This is kind of the thinking part of our brain. So this makes sense. When you're being creative, it's a thinking skill. It's the ability to manipulate and control your own thoughts. But look closely, the second part of the brain to fire up when you're doing a creative task is a cluster in the left medial temporal lobe. Now this part of the brain primarily has to do with memory, specifically semantic memory. Now this begs a question. So yes, creativity is definitely a skill, we're up here working it, but what does memory then have to do with it? That's what this paper taps into. So what do these researchers do? These researchers get three different groups of people. The first group are just control, just healthy individuals. The second group have what's called frontotemporal dementia. So this is a form of dementia where the front part of the brain starts to deteriorate. Now the third group of individuals had what's called semantic dementia. So this is a different form of dementia where the frontal lobe stays intact, but the medial temporal lobe starts to disappear. So by comparing these three groups of individuals as they perform an alternate use task, we can start to see where does creativity really lie and what really starts to damage it. So all these three groups do the alternate use task, and here's what they find. On average, people in the control group, they come up with 30 uses for any item they're given, and those uses tend to fall into about 9 categories. Now the people with frontotemporal dementia, so the part where the thinking part of their brain starts to deteriorate, but the semantic memory parts of the brain are fine, they tend to come up with about 15 uses, so about half of what the controls came up with, and those fall into about 5 categories. So again, they do about half as well as the controls. Now what about the semantic dementia patients? So remember again, these are the ones where the semantic memory networks of the brain are gone, but the frontal thinking parts are fine. These people tend to come up with only about 7 items that fall into only about 2.5 categories. So again, about half worse than the frontotemporal dementia. So what does this suggest? This suggests that although creativity might require some thinking skills up here, it's largely predicated upon semantic knowledge. So the reason they believe that these people with semantic dementia start to lose creativity, divergent thinking skills, isn't because they can't do it up here, it's because they don't have the knowledge here to play with. They still have their episodic memories intact, so they can think back to moments when they've used each item. So like, let's say they get a brick and they say, how many ways can you use a brick? They can think back to, oh, there was that day I built a wall. Oh, there was that day I used a brick as a doorstop, but they can't think of anything beyond that. They can't creatively move those those ideas, so they're only stuck with their experiences. So interesting, let's bring this back now to the school debate. A lot of the times my students ask me, how can I be more creative? And the only simple answer is, know a ton of stuff. Trying to strip away learning from school is probably going to lead to less creativity than allowing kids to continue to learn and build semantic facts, which will then later allow creativity to emerge. So this kind of dichotomy where people think, if you learn too much, you're going to become too rigid. No, rigidity comes with the episodic memories. Fluency, divergence, creativity comes when those become semantic memories, and now we can start to play with them. Now, again, I'm not saying like play and exploration are bad, but if you start with play and exploration, try and jump into these deep levels of learning, a lot of the times it's going to lead to confusion and not a ton of creativity. But if you start at that front end and say, okay, let's lock our facts down, and now let's start exploring. Once we get the basics, now we can think. And that is what's going to lead to the emergence of creativity. It's not a skill that you teach at the offset. It's a skill that comes out of deep understanding and then playing with it. And this also then kind of brings us back to that idea we were talking about a couple weeks ago. If semantic facts are the basis of creativity in all of our deep thinking, how do I build semantic facts? Exposure and repetition at the outset. The only way to build semantic facts is to build multiple contextual episodic memories. That's when you can pull out these semantic memories. So exposure and repetition during early learning remains key. So thank you all so much again for watching this. Another great article. I loved this one. If you liked what you heard, if you can give me a thumbs up and subscribe below, it'll make sure more people can hear this. And as kind of our takeaway question this week, I want to ask you, where do you sit on this creativity debate? This idea of school killing creativity. So leave a comment below, let us know your ideas. We can get a kind of dialogue conversation going down there. Again, just another way to get more ideas out. Thank you all so much again for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye, y'all.